Well, hello there, Space Monkeys. Welcome to Political Fight Club. I'm Robert Durden. In this episode, we're going to continue with Mao's On Guerrilla Warfare. We're going to read Chapter 2. And before we get started, I want to encourage you guys to actually go out and get the book, go to the library, get an ebook or something like that and follow along. Feel free to ask questions in the comments. This is a book club after all. And I also think it's important for you guys to understand the lens through which I'm analyzing this book. I've never read it before, so I'm reading this for the first time on film here with you guys. So I'm going to analyze on the fly as well. But the way that I am using the information in this book is to help me understand and to plan out and to strategize through the information war, which I think PFC-style politics is the most important way that we can fight the corporate propaganda apparatus through guerrilla warfare tactics online. And that includes, my goal is to put the propagandists out of business by beating them at their own game, by creating content that is true, but also more entertaining. And I want to drown them out and create a parallel institution like the INN, the Indie News Network, along with many other independent networks that work together behind the scenes and collaborate and cross-pollinate so that they can create a network of thousands of creators who do memeing, music writing, editing software, creating montages, making fun of propagandists, but also doing the news better than they can. And the goal is ultimately to have that independent news network be a parallel institution that puts the corporate propaganda apparatus out of business. So that's my goal, and that's my enemy, is the corporate propaganda apparatus. So everything that I'm doing in terms of analyzing this book is through that lens. So you have to know where I'm coming from, and I encourage you, if you want to be part of this revolution, which it could take years, it could take decades, it could take a century. Know your enemy, know what you want your role to be in it, and then analyze what I'm reading to you right now through that lens. Know what your goals are, know what you want to get done individually or as a small group, and let's apply these guerrilla warfare tactics appropriately. So this is page 13, chapter 2, the relation of guerrilla hostilities to regular operations. The general features of orthodox hostilities, that is, the war of position and the war of movement, differ fundamentally from guerrilla warfare. There are other readily apparent differences, such as those in organization, armament, equipment supply, tactics, command, in conception of the terms front and rear, in the matter of military responsibilities. When considered from the point of view of total numbers, guerrilla units are many. As individual combat units, they may vary in size from the smallest, of several score or several hundred men, to the battalion or the regiment, of several thousand. This is not the case in regularly organized units. A primary feature of guerrilla operations is their dependence upon the people themselves to organize battalions and other units. As a result of this, organization depends largely upon local circumstances. In the case of guerrilla groups, the standard of equipment is of a low order, and they must depend for their sustenance primarily upon what the locality affords. The strategy of guerrilla warfare is manifestly unlike that employed in orthodox operations, as the basic tactic of the former is constant activity and movement. There is in guerrilla warfare no such thing as a decisive battle. There is nothing comparable to the fixed, passive defense that characterizes orthodox war. In guerrilla warfare, the transformation of a moving situation into a positional defensive never arises. The general features of reconnaissance, partial deployment, general deployment, and development of the attack that are usual in mobile warfare are not common in guerrilla war. There are differences also in the matter of leadership and command. In guerrilla warfare, small units acting independently play the principal role, and there must be no excessive interference with their activities. In orthodox warfare, particularly in a moving situation, a certain degree of initiative is accorded subordinates, but in principle, command is centralized. This is done because all units and all supporting arms in all districts must coordinate to the highest degree. In the case of guerrilla warfare, this is not only undesirable, but impossible. Only adjacent guerrilla units can coordinate their activities to any degree. Strategically, their activities can be roughly correlated with those of the regular forces, and tactically, they must cooperate with adjacent units of the regular army. but there are no strictures on the extent of guerrilla activity, nor is it primarily characterized by the quality of cooperation of many units. When we discuss the terms front and rear, it must be remembered that while guerrillas do not have bases, or do have bases, their primary field of activity is in the enemy's rear area. They themselves have no rear. Because an Orthodox army has rear installations, except in some special cases as during the 10,000-mile-long march of the Red Army, or as in the case of certain units operating in the Shanxi province, it cannot operate as guerrillas can. As to the matter of military responsibilities, those of the guerrillas are to exterminate small forces of the enemy, to harass and weaken large forces, to attack enemy lines of communications, to establish bases capable of supporting independent operations in the enemy's rear, to force the enemy to disperse his strength, and to coordinate all these activities with those of the regular armies on distant battlefronts. From the foregoing summary of differences that exist between guerrilla warfare and orthodox warfare, it can be seen that it is improper to compare the two. Further distinction must be made in order to clarify this matter. While the 8th Route Army is a regular army, its North China campaign is essentially guerrilla in nature, for it operates in the enemy's rear. On occasion, however, 8th Route Army commanders have concentrated powerful forces to strike an enemy in motion, and the characteristics of orthodox mobile warfare were evident as in the battle at Pingxingquan and in other engagements. On the other hand, after the fall of Fenglingtu, the operations of Central Shanxi and Siwan, troops were more guerrilla than orthodox in nature. In this connection, the precise character of Generalissimo Chang's instructions to the effect that independent brigades would carry out guerrilla operations should be recalled. In spite of such temporary activities, these orthodox units retained their identity, and after the fall of Fengtu Line, they were not only able to fight along orthodox lines, but often found it necessary to do so. This is an example of the fact that orthodox armies may, due to changes in the situation, temporarily function as guerrillas. Likewise, guerrilla units formed from the people may gradually develop into regular units, when operating as such employ the tactics of orthodox mobile war. While these units function as guerrillas, they may be compared to innumerable gnats, which, by biting a giant both in front and rear, ultimately exhaust him. They make themselves as unendurable as a group of cruel and hateful devils, and as they grow and attain gigantic proportions, they will find that their victim is not only exhausted, but practically perishing. It is for this very reason that our guerrilla activities are a source of constant mental worry to Imperial Japan. And for people like me, I like it when people that are individual people that just care about doing the right thing and fighting this guerrilla war work together on social media, like Twitter. And when you attack propagandists by the hundreds, at first, a few hundred people with maybe 100 followers each seems insignificant when you're attacking somebody like TYT or CNN or Fox News. But the more you attack and the bigger you get and the more followers you get, suddenly those hundreds of people that used to have 100 followers suddenly have thousands of followers each, or tens of thousands of followers each. And that is when you can, like a swarm of piranha, just kind of take chunks out of the elephant's legs as they're trying to cross the river, and 1,000 people like that of the people can always take down one of these giants that is employed by one of the mainstream media outlets. And that's what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to encourage as many people as possible to become a piranha in the big swarm. While it is improper to confuse orthodox with guerrilla operations, it is equally improper to consider that there is a chasm between the two. While differences do exist, similarities appear under certain conditions, and this fact must be appreciated if we wish to establish clearly the relationship between the two. If we consider both types of warfare as a single subject, or if we confuse guerrilla warfare with the mobile operations of orthodox war, we fall into this error. We exaggerate the function of guerrillas and minimize that of the regular armies. If we agree with Chang Su-hua, who says, quote, guerrilla warfare is the primary war strategy of a people seeking to emancipate itself, or with Cao Kang, who believes that, quote, Guerrilla strategy is the only strategy possible for oppressed people. We are exaggerating the importance of guerrilla hostilities. What these zealous friends I have just quoted do not realize is this. If we do not fit guerrilla operations into their proper niche, we cannot promote them realistically. Then, not only would those who oppose take advantage of our varying opinions to turn them to their own uses to undermine us, but guerrillas would be led to assume responsibilities they could not successfully discharge, and that should properly be carried out by the orthodox force. In the meantime, the important guerrilla function of coordinating activities with the regular forces would be neglected. And as I said with the last chapter, I always saw the orthodox forces of this information war as journalists. I am not a journalist. I'm a commentator. I'm an analyst, but I don't do what they do. I protect them. I'm the backup. I'm the guerrilla warrior to their orthodox warrior. And I think those two need to be distinct. They need to intermingle, and there are people that can do both, but should not try to do both all the time. I think it's important that they remain separate and that there remain to be journalists who do good journalism and who are promoted and protected by professional shit talkers like me. And that's the guerrilla warriors. I think that's important. Furthermore, if the theory that guerrilla warfare is our only strategy were actually applied, the regular forces would be weakened. We would be divided in purpose, and guerrilla hostilities would decline. If we say, quote, let us transform the regular forces into guerrillas, and do not place our first reliance on a victory to be gained by the regular armies over the enemy, we may certainly expect to see as a result the failure of the anti-Japanese war of resistance. The concept that guerrilla warfare is an end in itself and that guerrilla activities can be divorced from those of the regular forces is also incorrect. If we assume that guerrilla warfare does not progress from beginning to end beyond its elementary forms, we have failed to recognize the fact that guerrilla hostilities can, under specific conditions, develop and assume orthodox characteristics. An opinion that admits the existence of a guerrilla war, but isolates it, is one that does not properly estimate the potentialities of such a war. Equally dangerous is the concept that condemns guerrilla war on the ground that war has no other aspects than the purely orthodox. This opinion is often expressed by those who have seen the corrupt phenomena of some guerrilla regimes, observed their lack of discipline, and have seen them used as a screen behind which certain persons have indulged in bribery and other corrupt practices. These people will not admit the fundamental necessity for guerrilla bands that spring from the armed people. They say, quote, only the regular forces are capable of conducting guerrilla operations. This theory is a mistaken one and would lead to the abolition of the people's guerrilla war. A proper conception of the relationship that exists between guerrilla efforts and that of the regular forces is essential. We believe it can be stated this way, quote, guerrilla operations during the anti-Japanese war may for a certain time and temporarily become its paramount feature, particularly insofar as the enemy's rear is concerned. However, if we view the war as a whole, there can be no doubt that our regular forces are of primary importance because it is they who are alone capable of producing the decision. Guerrilla warfare assists them in producing this favorable decision. Orthodox forces may under certain conditions operate as guerrillas, and the latter may, under certain conditions, develop to the status of the former. However, both guerrilla forces and regular forces have their own respective development and their proper combinations. And see, that's again why I differentiate. You may have seen Max Blumenthal, who's an actual journalist, went to the UN Security Council earlier this week and gave an awesome 20-minute speech on the Ukraine war and how our country has been spurring it on, and gave all of these citations. That is something that I would never be invited to do, and if I were invited to do it, I would tell them to go screw. I don't want to be like that. I want to be the backup to somebody like Max Blumenthal, who can take an attack as much as anybody online and in the public eye, but I don't want to be seen as a journalist. I want to be able to say exactly what I want. I want to be able to attack anybody that is of that corporate propaganda apparatus, and I don't want to be able to be journalists. If they were to do the same thing, they would immediately be smeared and said, that's not really a journalist. Look at them. They're out there attacking and causing chaos and making jokes about people all the time. Journalists need to maintain their credibility by maintaining a bit of by sitting back a little bit. And that has to happen because otherwise all the journalists will just be smeared as these crazy people that go out there and attack people personally all the time. No, no, no. That's what us guerrilla warriors and us political shit talkers do. So they have to be separate. I don't want to be like them. I want to be the backup that covers our journalists to make sure that when they get attacked and smeared online, that the people out there that are willing to take as many hits as it takes swarm like piranha and protect them. We are the journalists' backup. To clarify the relationship between the mobile aspect of Orthodox war and guerrilla war, we may say that general agreement exists that the principal element of our strategy must be mobility. With the war of movement, we may at times combine with the war of position. Both of these are assisted by general guerrilla hostilities. It is true that on the battlefield mobile war often becomes positional. It is true that this situation may be reversed. It is equally true that each form may combine with the other. The possibility of such combination will become more evident after the prevailing standards of equipment have been raised. For example, in a general strategical counterattack to recapture key cities and lines of communication, it would be normal to use both mobile and positional methods. However, the point must again be made that our fundamental strategical form must be the war of movement. If we deny this, we cannot arrive at the victorious solution to the war. In sum, while we must promote guerrilla warfare as a necessary strategical auxiliary to orthodox operations, we must neither assign it the primary position in our war strategy nor substitute it for mobile and positional warfare as conducted by orthodox forces. Meaning, again, we're not the ones that are going to win this war. The journalists are going to win the information war. We exist to protect the journalists before they get put in prison, like Julian Assange, or smeared into oblivion. And the journalists need to keep doing what they're doing, knowing full well that they have backup. That backup is PFC-style guerrillas like us. And we have to exist because otherwise the journalists in this Western capitalist hellscape we're living in get smeared or imprisoned. No, no, no. We are the backup to make sure that they are protected and they don't get smeared and they don't get put in prison. That is our function. But we intermingle when we have to, but we are completely separate, and we must both exist and understand our roles if we're going to win the information war. So that's the end of the chapter. We'll finish with chapter 3, Guerrilla Warfare in History, page 21, next episode. Keep fighting that good fight, guys. I'll talk to you later.